It's the 23rd of the 7th, 2025, and that means one thing and one thing only. At 23 minutes past the hour, we are about to get techier than techie things. 3 topics on the docket today. Ferrari, Scuderia Ferrari and their multitudinous travails of the mechanical and aerodynamic variety. One of the goatiest to have ever put a pen to F1 topics, the one that they call Marquise of the race, has spoken to it and peeled back at those multitudinous travails, highlighting a couple that I don't think too many people have noted. It's important this because Hughesy's a god tier 1, super intelligent as far as all things mechanical and aerodynamic as it pertains to Formula 1. So too we'll talk about Pierre Gasly, pictures taken of him paying homage as he always does to Antoine Hubert, making us critically aware, acutely aware of the fragility of life, particularly as it pertains to F1. And in the final instance, we'll talk about Maximilian Verstappen and his future. I don't make the news chat, I just break it. You'll forgive me for talking about this ad infinitum, as if it could potentially be one of the biggest F1 news stories in its 75-year history. If I talk about that in perpetuity, I make no apology for it. In the first instance, therefore, let's talk about Pierre Gasly. Now, there's not been a serious injury or death in F1 for the most recent history, right? It hasn't happened for a while now, and I think for that we need to thank the F1 racing gods. Every time you attend a motorsport event, you've got a sign on the dotted line that you are well aware, now more than ever, that motorsport is dangerous. Danger always has a front row seat. Pierre Gasly is aware of that more than most. Charles Leclerc too. All of them, Lewis Hamilton, all of them will be aware of how dangerous the sporting endeavour that is F1, sporting endeavour par excellence, is. Yet and still, they've introduced the halo. They've made the cars super robust, heavier, but nonetheless more robust, and so therefore safer. This, though, is an image of Pierre Gasly attending the Spa-Francorchamps Grand Prix, the circuit, and paying homage to his old mate Antoine Hubert. This hits deep. How can you be a human and not cry at this? It makes you realise, again, we haven't seen a serious injury or death in F1. Thank the F1 gods for a long time now, and may it continue. Super touching moment. Oh, and by the way, let's talk about Scuderia Ferrari because it gets techier than techie things. Let me leave that. Let me go back to me and then we'll talk about this. Mark Hughes has published an article on the race and he's gone deep. You know the context. Sir Lewis Hamilton has been complaining about Ferrari and its handling dynamic. The fact that it doesn't give him the confidence through the high speed. Twisties, maggots, Beckett's, Eau Rouge this weekend, that the car lacks the rigidity at the rear as far as its suspension, which would facilitate it as an SF25 iteration of Scuderia Ferrari car to run itself as low to the ground as they intended. They've had to jack up the ride height with a view to mitigate and minimise the extent to which that car has excessive plank wear. Again, it got DNF'd at the Chinese Grand Prix, didn't it? But that was the only Grand Prix thus far where we've seen Sir Lewis driven in anger at 10 tenths in the sprint race. Do you understand that if you can run the car low in a ground effect area, you get more downforce, therefore you get more confidence, more rigidity, especially through the medium to high speed twisties. Brand new suspension. It's been tested at Mugello and they think it could potentially be the panacea, but the panacea was always there. Run the car lower and apparently the suspension allows them to do that. But the legend that is Mark Hughes points out a couple of other different things, a couple of other unwanted entries as far as the multitudinous travails and foibles even of the SF25 at the altar of mechanical and aerodynamic efficiency. Here's what Mark Hughes says, that there's something been going on with that car season to date, that between Q2 and Q3, all of the other top 4 teams being McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari, all of the other 3 even, take a step on between Q2, dial their engines up to 12 and are quicker as near as makes no difference every single time. He writes, In the 14 qualifying sessions season to date, including sprint quali, Ferrari has not once found the most lap time of the 4 teams. Not once. Oh, the humanity. What's going on there? Therefore, this feels like a trend. Mark Hughes continues, McLaren has found the most on 4 occasions between Q2 and Q3. Mercedes and Red Bull 5 times apiece. Ferrari 0. That, ladies and gentlemen, speaks to something going on, and Mark Hughes speculates that it could be a couple different things. In the first instance, you recall, you would have heard the likes of Adami and Bosey, the race engineers of Lewis and Charles Leclerc respectively, telling them LICO, that's short for lift and coast. Now, we thought potentially that was reminiscent of Red Bull in circa 2022, 2023, going through Spa-Francorchamps, when LICO was the same command being given to one Checo Perez and Maximilian Verstappen, because that time, sprint race settings, they'd set the car up far too low and risked just as Scuderia Ferrari did at the Chinese Grand Prix this year, a cheeky disqualification at the altar of excessive plank, where it gets techier than techie things though, because going forward potentially Ferrari might need to raise their, in fact that's what they did. Chat, what do you want about, Cameron? They raised their bloody ride height, and same way, that's why they keep talking about LICO, is it not? Lift and coast. That's what I thought, that's what we thought it pertained to. Lift and coast to mitigate for the to mitigate the extent to which plank wears, and that they run the risk of a cheeky disqualification. Mark Hughes puts forth, however, today a very different supposition. He argues that LICO might, of course, it might still have something to do with the excessive plank wear, potentially, but also he throws in another potential entrant, another contributant. He writes, in the first instance, potentially an internal temperature issue when the engine is extended on full throttle for an extended period of time. Note that you see this Q2, Q3 differential, that it gets exacerbated between Ferrari and the rest in Red Bull, Mercedes and McLaren around these high power tracks. Please see Australia, please see Silverstone, the British Grand Prix. He puts forth, if the valves begin to exceed a critical temperature at sustained high speed running when used on the most aggressive rev limit and mixture settings, then the software would automatically correct that by enriching the mixture, using the extra fuel to cool down the valves so as to save the engine from detonating. He puts forth a second proposition that potentially on circuits with lots of flat out running but relatively little braking, it's possible that the extra flat out running could drain the battery faster than anticipated, and thus the electrical power would not be deployed as efficiently around the lap. Now, Lewis has always been talking about the rigidity of the wheel, not getting confidence. He also talked about the brakes, now dealing with Brembos as opposed to CI at Mercedes, carbon industry. So too, Charles Leclerc said something. He goes, listen, there's something else that we're struggling about which I cannot talk. Mark Hughes is filling in the gaps. And again, all F1 journos are created equally, but some are created more equal than others. Remember, Mark Hughes was one of the guys that put together the split turbo hybrid picture, explaining why Mercedes had anywhere between 30 to 40 brake horsepower on the rest of the field going back to 2014. He's the one that put it forth to Andy Cowell, and Andy Cowell filled in the dots. You recall, Mark Hughes' mind was already 80% of the way there, and I wouldn't put it past him to have nailed this one also. Oh, and by the way, when we talk about Mr. Maximilian Verstappen, the context is as follows. You guys know that it gets techier than techie things as far as the weird and wacky world that is Maximilian Verstappen. Why? Well, for a couple of different reasons. Because he's the best now. He is the best. He has been the best for the past bloody I don't know how long, since 2021, let's say. And that's why it gets techier than techie things, because Toto, the boy who cried wolf, has been courting that fella, notwithstanding what he said to the press and media. He's made sure that he's got the rubber stamp from the C-suite exec level bods over at Mercedes, and this is key. especially when you consider how seismic it would be, how seminal a moment it would be in F1 history if Maximilian Verstappen jumps up and leaves the balls that are red shortly after one Christian Horner's left. What are we doing, chat? Go on, let's have a look at this because this is important. The news breaks today. Excuse me. The news breaks today that Toto, the boy who cried wolf, has given an interview to sportorf.at, and in there he's backed away from the Max Verstappen pulpit. Oh, the humanity. Surely not, I hear you say. Let's read it together because there are some techier than techie things in here. Mercedes not yet planning to use Max Verstappen. Okay, some of that's lost in translation, but you get the picture. Grice's razor settings. For weeks, rumours have persisted about an early move by world champion Maximilian Verstappen from Red Bull to Mercedes. The dismissal of long-time team boss Christian Horner has given new impetus to the rumour. Ahead of Sunday's Belgian Grand Prix, Mercedes boss Toto, the boy who cried wolf, makes it clear to ORF that despite all interest, the move is unlikely to happen anytime soon. Do you see the caveat? Can we read between the lines together that it's unlikely to happen, comma, any time soon? The focus, therefore, when I read that from Toto, the boy who cried wolf, isn't to put down his Maximilian Verstappen. No, he still wants him, but 2026 might be out of bounds. We'll read on and you'll understand why soon. Toto says, but I don't think there will be any major surprises. Go on then. There are caveats here, and it's important to read between the lines. In Spa-Francorchamps, with the 70th Belgium Grand Prix will be held this weekend, the decision on next year's drivers is expected to be made, quote, Toto said, it's not just about the team making a decision. The drivers also need to know where they stand. We've heard all that before, Toto. Give George a 2-year contract, therefore, not a 1+1, sir. If you are knee-deep in George Russell PSE, King George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk, then give that dude the contract that is not in substantial outperformance deserves season to date. Toto continues, quote, we've always tried to adhere to this rule and we'll do the same again this time. Yeah, so why are you still talking to Max Verstappen? Why was your yacht parked up alongside his? Therefore, why at the previous press conferences have you made no bows, no quibbles about courting Max Verstappen before the eyes of the world's press and media? Toto continues, the direction is that we want to continue with George and Kimi. Well, give that dude a contract, therefore, Toto. You know what I mean? Less talk, more action, sir. Goes a long way sometimes, that. Toto, the boy who cried wolf. That's our top priority. And if we listen, you guys will tell me that I'm being a bit harsh on Toto, but he's the one who said that he was going to give Lewis Hamilton a car capable of winning an unprecedented 8th, that he owed his great friend that. What happened to that? Read Ross Brawn's book and you will hear exactly how two-faced and duplicitous Toto, the boy who cried wolf, can be. And that's not coming out of anybody's mouth. That's coming out of Ross Brawn's. That's our top priority, keeping George Russell. He says, pull the other one. I will not hold my breath, particularly when it gets round to 2027. Toto, he says, everybody's up to date. Everybody's been kept involved. You know when you cheat on your wife and then you confess your sins? That's what it feels like Toto's trying to do here. Listen, I know I did wrong, but here's the truth, and that absolves me of all liability and culpability. Toto, it does not, at the very least, it doesn't in King George Russell's eyes. Here we go. Here's where it gets techie, and here's the breaking news. Exit clause obsolete for this year. We've talked about this ad infinitum, that Julian Sedasoli said that it's top 2 as far as the Drivers' Championship. Ergo, if Max Verstappen is 3rd or lower, he can effect for his performance clause, null and void his contract, which currently sees him stay at Red Bull to 2028. Others, mention no names, James Allen, Matt Bishop, friend of the channel both, they've speculated that it's 3rd or lower, 4th or lower even. Techie. And so too around the timing. Many people said that it was July the 31st going into the summer break. Some speculated that it was at the halfway point of the season. Race 12, the British Grand Prix. Sport.orf says that the exit clause for Max Verstappen for this year is now obsolete. Why is this so important? Well, because if Max Verstappen can get out of his contract, then he can go and join whichever team he wants free of charge. Son's buyout clause or buyout fee. Buyout fee for Maximilian Verstappen, £100 million. It's one thing, Toto, the boy who cried wolf, going to the C-suite execs and demanding £100 million remuneration per diem for Maximilian Verstappen due to him each and every single year that he drives a Mercedes. It's another going to ask for the same plus an extra 100 million Great British pounds in the first year. There is something called a payback period. In accounting terminology, it's the rate at which you get back your money and some. That extra 100 million will lengthen that payback period materially. Ergo, when you get to your remuneration committee and have to have Ola Kalunias sign something like this off, the extra 100 million makes the task that much more difficult. The exit clause now obsolete, says sport.orf. Read this with me because this is where it gets techie. Wolff, however, made no secret of the fact that a driver of Max Verstappen's caliber would not be overlooked. Surely, therefore, your second stanza, sport.orf, contradicts your first. The superstar's resume speaks for itself. 4 consecutive world championships plus 65 Grand Prix victories, 61 more than George Russell and Anthony combined. Oh, the humanity. However, due to the Dutchman's contract, a collaboration would likely not be an option until the 2027 season at earliest. The exit clause would have allowed Verstappen to leave Red Bull during the season is obsolete this year. Verstappen would have had to be outside the top 3, not top 2 in the World Championship standing at the halfway point this year. That is, at this point in time, the 27-year-old born in Belgium travels to Spa in 3rd place. However, the window will reopen next year, ladies and gentlemen. Toto will be desperate to give George, therefore, a 1+1 deal, something that George Russell doesn't want to accept. Creative holiday pictures. Okay, so this, yeah, we've seen this. This is the AI, the Photoshop settings. The Mercedes boss only had a tired smile for the vacation. There we go. And he has a tired smile for the vacation photos of Toto and Verstappen that surfaced online. He says, what's new is that people are making photo collages with airplanes. We've never had that before. Just because you vacation near, he confesses, you mean just because you vacation near each other, not near each other, Toto. We saw the GPS. You were adjacent to each other. Max could have jumped off his boat and directly onto yours, sir. So Toto confesses what we already knew, that they were next to each other. Just because you vacation near each other doesn't mean you'll work together in Formula One. We've always got along very well. It just so happens that we vacation in similar areas. Similar areas, Toto. Be precise with your language, sir. In the same bloody area to 2 decimal places as far as the longitude and latitude. What are we doing here, chat? Toto, I swear, honestly, he thinks that we're stupid, doesn't he, Toto? He wants to pretend as if there was nothing to see here. Do you know what I mean? Just because I'm being truthful, surely that offsets my culpability if, again, I cheated on my wife. What's important here as well, though, chat? Maximilian Verstappen has given an interview, a rare interview to The Athletic, courtesy of the New York Times. There's a couple different bits and bobs in there. We'll go through it at some length tomorrow when I've had time to wrap my head around it. However, skim reading it against the context of Maximilian Verstappen's future, 2026, brand new rule and regs, 50% ICE, 50%, or the 50% ICE, 50% electric. That has to matter, especially when you hear the rumour and speculation as far as Red Bull powertrains in conjunction with Ford, that they're failing to expedite for their learning curve, that on the pecking order, they are 3rd or 4th. This is coming from people more acutely aware of the power unit circumstance and the respective learning curves than you or I. Maximilian Verstappen had this to say to The Athletic about the new rules, which will be chaos, the unprecedented circumstance, rarefied regulatory air, being that it's not just the power unit that changes, it's the rules and regs around the aero. That's the first time I recall that that's ever happened in Formula One history. Big rule change, meaning therefore 1 or 2 teams probably will make a leap, take a step, a material one as far as durable competitive advantage on the rest. Here's what Max Verstappen says in The Athletic, an interview today. says it is a massive change, that it's not just about the article continues, it's not about just about the engines, it's about the aero, it's about the size of the car, the parameters within which the teams and drivers have to work. The fuel will consist of sustainable alternatives. Max Verstappen says, therefore, it is, quote, a big question mark for everybody. He continues, quote, for me, you just hope that you're with the right team, and I don't want to say, quote, luck in, but in a way you do luck in, because if you're a good driver and suddenly your team steps up, then you know that you have a winning chance. That is how F1 works. Max Verstappen is acutely aware that this next step, whatever he chooses to make, whether it's stay at Red Bull or go to Mercedes or even an Aston Martin, will shape the way in which the F1 world sees him, what his legacy looks like in 10 to 20 years. I heard it said on a podcast very recently, it will determine whether we talk about Maximilian Verstappen in the annals alongside a Michael Schumacher and a Sir Lewis Hamilton, a 7, potentially 8 or 9 or 10-time champion, or whether Max Verstappen becomes another Alain Prost, another Fernando El Plan Alonso, a good one, a great one even, but not the goateest of goats. And that, ladies and gentlemen, if I understand anything about Max Verstappen, is what that dude desperately doesn't want. He's a killer of a Formula One driver and wants nothing more than to win and extend for his legacy, notwithstanding the fact that before the eyes of the world press and media, accredited F1 media, he will say anything to the contrary, that he just comes to drive, that's his job, and he just wants to win races, a simple human being. But I would be arguing very firmly with tongue-in-cheek if I believed that to be true for a second. Maximilian Verstappen wants all the Affinity Stones, all the championships, to go down as the greatest, both greatest driver on track, the most decorated, and the one with the most accolades as far as championships of the drivers' variety. Between now and next time, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.